In the still hush that follows sunset, the world of the Vikings transformed. As twilight faded and stars began to pierce the ink-black sky, a golden flicker danced across the thick wooden beams of the Norse longhouse. It wasn't just the hearth fire glowing. It was the beginning of a nightly ritual, quiet and ancient. Inside, shadows stretched across packed earth floors, and the scent of smoke, wool, and pine filled the air. This was the hour of settling, of warmth, of stillness. In the modern world, our nights hum with electricity, screens glow, cities shimmer with artificial light. We live in defiance of darkness and pay the price. But the Norse people, 1,000 years before us, lived differently. They leaned into the night, wrapped themselves in its rhythm, and, perhaps without knowing it, slept in a way our restless age can only envy. Tonight we begin our journey into the sleep of the Viking Age, a sleep guided not by clocks, alarms, or sleep apps, but by the breath of fire and the arc of the stars. It is a journey into a forgotten wisdom, hidden in sagas, in soil, in silence. The Longhouse, home and haven. Imagine it. A rectangular structure built from sturdy timber and turf, its thick walls insulating against the harsh Nordic winds. At its heart burns a fire, not for cooking, not just for heat, but as the glowing soul of the household. Around it the community gathers, elders, children, travelers. They eat. They speak softly. They listen. There are no bedrooms, no doors to close, only raised sleeping platforms running along the walls layered with straw, wool, and skins. People sleep together, not just for warmth, but for safety, connection, and peace. And above it all, silence. Outside, darkness isn't a void to be lit. It is presence, a force, a reminder. The Vikings lived without electric interference, no phones to check, no fluorescent bulbs to fight their biology. They didn't ask when to sleep. Their bodies simply told them. The Viking relationship with sleep was not a fight. It was a surrender. This surrender began not with bedtime routines, but with a philosophy of rhythm. As the fire dimmed, so too did the day's ambitions. Conversation waned. Tasks paused. A hush spread through the longhouse like a blessing. In this culture, often imagined as brutal, battle-worn, and loud, there was room for stillness, for deep, uninterrupted rest. Modern science is only just beginning to understand what they may have known intuitively. That sleep, real sleep, requires more than a mattress and a schedule. It requires an atmosphere, a mood, a slowing of the spirit. And the Vikings, in their dark wooden homes lit only by flame and moonlight, created that atmosphere perfectly. A different kind of darkness. Unlike the pale glow we know as night, Viking darkness was true and deep. Their dwellings had no windows. Light came from the hearth and nowhere else. When it was time to rest, the flames were banked low, creating an environment most modern humans have never experienced, total darkness. And with that came something sacred, a message to the body. Now, rest. Darkness triggered their melatonin naturally. They didn't need supplements. Their bodies knew when sleep was near because the world told them. Their circadian rhythm wasn't disrupted. It was honored. And so, as the hearth burned low, one by one they lay down. Old bones found in ancient farmhouses show evidence of firm sleeping platforms, stuffed with straw and lined with fur. Comfortable, breathable, ergonomic in ways we're only now rediscovering. But more than the body, the mind was at peace. The longhouse didn't just house a family. It housed a rhythm, a pattern, a way of being. Here, in this first hour after dusk, sleep was not the interruption of life. It was its continuation, in softer tones. Stories were whispered. Bread was shared. The fire's rhythm became their own. And eventually, as the hush of night reached its deepest stillness, they slept, not because they were tired, but because the world told them it was time. There is a moment in the night, still and sacred, when time seems to bend. The fire has dimmed, silence has thickened, and somewhere deep in the Norse longhouse, an elder stirs, not because of trouble, not from fear, but because this is how the body used to sleep. Long ago, before electricity rewrote the rhythm of night, humans did not sleep in one long, unbroken stretch. They slept in two. The first sleep began shortly after nightfall. By the glow of firelight, the Norse people surrendered themselves to the hush of dusk. They slipped into rest, their bodies heavy, their breathing slow, not as escape, but as release. This first sleep lasted several hours, deep and restorative, guided by the comfort of warmth and dark. Then, without alarm, they woke. This waking was gentle, natural. There was no anxiety, no checking of clocks, no pressure to fall back asleep. Instead, it was a time for thought, for reflection, for soft conversation. A quiet interval where the mind drifted like smoke above embers, lucid, calm, unburdened. Historians call this biphasic sleep, but the Norse simply called it night. In these sacred interludes, often around midnight, people would pray, stoke the fire, perhaps speak in whispers with a nearby loved one. It was a time of mental clarity, a pause in the dark, a breath between breaths. Imagine it now, the crackle of fire just enough to light the beams above. A woman sits up, stirs the hearth, adjusts a wool blanket over her child. She doesn't rush to return to dreams. She simply sits, rests, is. And slowly the second wave comes. The return to sleep is smooth and steady, like a tide drawn back into the sea. It is not something fought for, but allowed. The Vikings returned to rest not by trying, but by surrender. Their second sleep carried them to morning, into dreams wrapped in the scent of firewood, the warmth of fur, and the deep security of darkness. Modern sleep research, buried beneath centuries of artificial light, is only now beginning to rediscover this rhythm. In medieval journals, in Norse sagas, in letters written by candlelight, clues appear. People woke in the middle of the night, not from dysfunction but by design. We were never meant to sleep in one endless stretch. We were meant to sleep like the Vikings. And what did they do with that middle time? Some told stories, some watched the fire and thought of ancestors, some simply listened to the wind outside, to the heartbeat of the world, to the flicker of flame and the stillness of time itself. The body followed the rhythm of the hearth, sleep, wake, reflect, return. It was not fragmentation. It was poetry. In the Viking longhouse, biphasic sleep was not a concept. It was life. And tonight, you too may find your body stirring after midnight. Don't be alarmed. Perhaps, like them, you are simply remembering a more ancient way of rest. So let the fire whisper. Let the dark hold you. Let yourself be still. There is no need to sleep all at once. The night is long and it welcomes you twice. Sleep was never just silence, not in the world of the Norse. For when the fire dimmed low and the longhouse had surrendered to darkness, another world opened its door. One not made of timber or snow, but of memories, gods and whispers older than time. The world of dreams. In the Viking mind, dreams were not idle flickers. They were messages, omens, visitations from ancestors, spirits. and sometimes the gods themselves. The sleeping soul drifted not into unconsciousness, but into a different realm. A realm where the sails of ships flapped above clouds, where wolves walked on water, where the stars spoke in runes, and the wind carried the breath of long-lost warriors. Wrapped in fur and silence, a boy closes his eyes, but in the fire's afterglow he walks through fields golden with wheat that never grew. He sees his grandmother, gone for years, standing at the edge of a fjord, smiling without sound. He steps forward, and she becomes a raven. Then the raven becomes the wind. Such was the nature of Norse dreams, alive, fluid, sacred. To the Vikings, this was not fantasy. It was truth in another form. The dream realm, Draumheimer, was not separate from life, but stitched into it. Just as the world tree Yggdrasil connected all realms, Asgard, Midgard, Hell, so too did dreams connect waking life to the unseen. At night, when no eyes watched and no tasks remained, the mind became a ship, and each dream a journey. Some sailed to places they had never been. Some relived hunts, births, deaths. Others returned to battles not yet fought. And in some dreams the gods appeared. Odin, the All-Father, would sometimes arrive cloaked in shadow, one eye glowing like a cold star, whispering a riddle only the heart could answer. Freya might ride a chariot through flame, her hair glowing like dawn, offering a kiss that granted courage or sorrow. Even the trickster Loki was known to visit, leaving behind laughter or unease. The Norse did not dismiss such dreams. They remembered them, spoke of them at breakfast, etched them into sagas, and carved their meanings into wood and bone. For in dreams, the dead could speak, the unborn could be seen, and fate could be glimpsed, if only for a moment, like a reflection in water disturbed by breath. The longhouse in sleep was not still. It was alive with journeys. 20 souls resting under a single roof, each adrift on their own sea of fire-lit visions. For in dreams the dead could speak, the unborn could be seen, and fate could be glimpsed, if only for a moment, like a reflection in water disturbed by breath. The longhouse in sleep was not still. It was alive with journeys. 20 souls resting under a single roof, each adrift on their own sea of fire-lit visions. Sometimes they dreamt the same dream, a black horse galloping on snow, a silver fish leaping upstream. They would whisper it in the morning, surprised and not surprised, to find it shared. Science now calls this collective dreaming, or coincidence, but the Vikings called it sign, proof that the soul was never alone, even in sleep. And so, wrapped in skins, with the stars above and flame below, they dreamed not as escape, but as communion, with nature, with gods, with themselves. When the fire burned low and breath slowed, they crossed unseen borders, not with fear, but wonder. Their dreams were stories told by the soul, not to entertain, but to remember who they were. Tonight, as you rest, you too may sail. You too may visit places that never were and always have been. You may hear a voice, see a face long gone, touch a sky that sings. Do not be afraid. The Vikings dreamed like that too. Night in the Viking world was never empty. It was full of breath, of whispers, of watching eyes unseen. When the fire dimmed low and the longhouse grew quiet, there were still those who did not sleep. Not entirely. Some kept watch, not with eyes but with presence. The Vikings believed the night had guardians, spirits who moved between flame and shadow, ancestors who lingered, not to haunt, but to hold. You could not always see them, but you could feel them. the warmth beside you when no one was near, the sudden crack of wood when all was still, the dream that came with a face long gone, or a scent from childhood you hadn't known you missed. The Vikings did not fear these things. They welcomed them. The line between the living and the dead was not a wall. It was a curtain, drawn gently by firelight. Each hearth had memory. Each ember remembered stories told and lives lived. They believed that when you slept, your soul became still enough to hear what waking life shouted over, that the ancestors came not to take, but to guide. Grandfathers who once wielded axe and oar now drifted like mist above sleeping suns. Grandmothers who stitched sails now moved like breath through the rafters, blessing children wrapped in fur. These were not ghosts, they were Fieldjur, guiding spirits, linked to each person yet older than memory. Sometimes animal-shaped, sometimes faceless, but always watching. A man might dream of a bear and wake certain that his strength would be tested. A woman might see a white deer and sleep and know it was time to cross a threshold. They did not doubt these signs, they listened. In Norse tradition, sleep was a sacred vulnerability. It opened the self like a doorway, and through that doorway came more than dreams, came ancestors, came spirits, came meaning. The longhouse itself was built to welcome them, its curved beams like ribs of a great wooden creature, alive with memory, soft with smoke. They whispered prayers into fire, not loudly, but gently, so as not to startle what might be listening. They left small tokens, a braid of hair, a carved stone, a splash of mead, not as offerings of fear, but of gratitude. The children knew. They didn't ask for stories. They waited for them. And sometimes in the blue hour before dawn, a child would wake and say, "She stood at my feet." She sang, and the mother would nod as if she'd heard the song too. These experiences weren't questioned, they were honored. The boundary between this world and the next was not a barrier, but a rhythm, like tides, like breath, like sleep itself. Tonight, as you close your eyes, you might not be alone, but not in a way that frightens, in a way that comforts, in a way that says, you are remembered, you are protected, and the night is not empty. There is a hush more ancient than sleep, a quiet space between what was and what will be. The Vikings knew this silence. They lived by it, slept by it, not once, but twice. In our modern world, we imagine sleep as one long stretch, a single descent into rest, but long before alarm clocks and electric nights, sleep came in two waves. The first sleep, the waking hour. The second sleep. This was not disorder. This was design. The Norse longhouse would dim, and each soul would drift gently into the first sleep. A deep, healing stillness that lasted until midnight. Then, without fear or confusion, many would rise, not all at once, not urgently, but slowly, with breath and presence. They called it the watching hour. In this time the hearth was stoked gently, not to speak, but to glow, a soft warmth to accompany thought. Some would pray, some would reflect. Some would step outside, gaze at stars, or listen to the wind move through snow-laced trees. Children sometimes stirred, curling deeper into fur-lined beds. Elders sat wrapped in wool, speaking to no one in particular. There was no need for productivity, no pressure to sleep longer or deeper, just the natural rhythm of being. This second waking was sacred, a seam between two realms, a moment where the mind could wander, without noise, without demand. It was believed that dreams from the first sleep lingered in this in-between, like mist around the ankles of the waking. Some recorded their dreams with charcoal on driftwood. Others whispered them into the fire, watching the smoke carry them skyward. It was in this space, this middle hush, that insight often came. A hunter might understand an omen, a healer might recall a forgotten herb, a mother might feel her own mother's voice, guiding her gently from beyond. The silence was not empty, it was listening. The longhouse didn't murmur in this hour that it breathed. Outside, the stars blinked softly. Inside, hearts slowed, thoughts drifted like feathers. Then slowly, without effort, the second sleep would come, not demanded, but invited. As the hearth dimmed again and warmth filled the bones, the Norse would surrender once more, this time deeper, richer. This second sleep held other dreams, less vivid, more mysterious, as if the body had remembered something the mind had let go. And when dawn finally arrived, the household rose in quiet strength, having known both sleeps and the stillness between them. We lost this rhythm, we buried it beneath fluorescent lights, digital alarms, and the myth that good sleep comes in a single perfect block. But the Vikings, they knew better. They knew that sleep, like the tide, ebbs and returns. They trusted the pause. They honored the silence. Tonight, if you wake in the deep night, do not fear. You are not broken, you are ancient, you are simply walking in the footsteps of your ancestors between two dreams. Before sleep there was breath, not rushed, not shallow, but slow, full and sacred. In the Viking world, breath was more than survival. It was spirit. It was presence. It was divine. They believed that the gods breathed the world into being, that wind and soul were born from the same source, that the air moving through the trees at night carried the whispers of Odin himself. As darkness folded over the longhouse, the fire dimmed to an ember glow, and still the air was thick with life, not in motion, but in meaning. Smoke rose not as waste, but as offering. Sage, mugwort, and pine needles burned slow. Scents curled around wooden beams, blessing the space, preparing it, not just for rest, but for remembrance. The Norse called it anda, a word that meant both breath and spirit. They believed that every breath carried intention, that the way one exhaled could send messages to the divine. So they slowed down, not just the body, but the inner wind. With each inhale, they drew in the world. With each exhale, they gave thanks, or sent prayers to ancestors, or cleared the debris of thought. No one taught this rhythm. It was known in the bones, in the silence, in the way the smoke curled without hurry. Children mimicked their mothers, breathing softly as woolen blankets settled. Elders rocked gently, whispering to the hearth, letting their breath carry dreams before dreams began. Outside, the forest was still, but the air, it pulsed, not with movement, but with memory. The Vikings believed that the breath of their gods still lingered in the trees, the rivers, and in their own lungs. To breathe deeply was to honor that gift. To sleep peacefully was to return it, if only for the night. And in this ritual they cleaned not only the air but the mind. The act of burning herbs was not about scent. It was a ceremony, a final act before surrendering to the unknown. A bundle of dried yarrow might be passed around the room, each person waving smoke toward their face, toward their chest, toward their bed. No words were spoken, only intention, then silence, and breath. Not held, not forced, but received like a blessing. This was the Viking way. Even in war, even in sorrow, even in the longest winters, they remembered to breathe, They saw the air as more than empty space. It was filled with memory, with spirits, with possibility. Sleep was not an escape. It was a return to self, to source, to the gods, and breath. Breath was the bridge. The longhouse became still. The herbs burned low. The last log crackled inside. And in that sacred space, with lungs filled with ancient air, they closed their eyes and drifted gently, gratefully, into the waiting dark. As dawn's golden hush faded into day, the longhouse stirred with the sound of life, not labor but laughter. Children's feet pattered on wooden floors, their giggles echoing through smoke-stained beams. Outside, the frost still clung to grass like a silver veil, but within, the warmth of flame and family wrapped each soul like a woolen shawl. This was no ordinary morning. It was the beginning of a holy day, a feast day, when work paused and the gods were honored not through war or sacrifice, but through joy. In the Viking world, sacredness did not always wear solemnity. At times it wore the face of play, and so the day began, with games. The gods, as told in ancient sagas, were not distant, untouchable beings. They wrestled, raced, teased, and boasted. Thor, god of thunder, once lost a drinking contest to a giant. Loki, the trickster, disguised himself as a mare and birthed a horse. Even Odin, the all-wise, often wandered in riddles, gambling for wisdom. To the Norse, divinity wasn't perfection, it was participation, a life lived fully with mirth as much as might. And so the children mimicked the gods. They ran races across frozen fields. They balanced on logs and played tug-of-war with lengths of rope. Older boys practiced wrestling, their arms locked like tiny warriors, falling into laughter with every tumble. Girls sang songs of the Aesir, dancing in circles to rhythms their grandmothers once knew. The adults watched and joined. A man with a thick beard challenged a youth to a stone-lifting contest. Women raced with pails of water, trying not to spill a drop. The games were not just for sport, they were for spirit. Here in these humble competitions, the Viking soul expressed something deeper, a reverence for vitality, for the breath of life, for the divine spark within the mortal chest. To live joyfully was to live in honor of the gods. As midday sun slanted through the open slats of the roof, the longhouse was filled with feasting. Smoke from roasted lamb mingled with the sweet scent of honey bread and fermented apples. Wooden bowls passed hand to hand. Mead flowed. Stories were shared. And always, always, the laughter continued. There was magic in such days. Not the magic of spells and runes, but of memory. These games, these feasts, these simple joys would be remembered, etched not in runestones, but in hearts. Children who once played Viking gods would grow, would age, and on feast days of their own they would pass the torch, the rope, the song. Night came not with weariness, but with glow. Torches burned low. The children, exhausted, fell asleep on furs with smiles still tugging at their cheeks. Elders sat near the hearth, their eyes reflecting flame. They whispered tales of Thor's hammer, of Freya's cloak, of Baldur's light, and of the joy that connects all living things. Even the gods, it was said, needed laughter to endure eternity, and so must we. Here in this chapter of sleep and myth, we do not follow shadows into silence. We follow joy into rest. We remember that the body does not only need stillness, it also needs motion, and the heart does not only need peace, it needs play. The games of the gods were more than play. They were practice for living well, for sleeping well, and with that, the fire dims, the world softens, and the night begins again. After the joy, the quiet. Not all nights begin in laughter. Some begin in the slow hush that follows too much life. Tonight the longhouse is still. The fires are not out, but they burn low, steady, soft. No songs echo from the beams. No feet dance across the wooden floor. Only the creak of timber and the hush of breath. The feast is over, the games are done, and in the silence that follows there is a sacredness. This is the hour of reflection, when the soul, full from joy, empties gently into calm. The Norse people knew that celebration must be followed by stillness. Just as the waves retreat after striking the shore, the spirit withdraws after a day of brightness. Even the gods, they said, retreated. Odin, the all-seeing, often wandered alone into dark forests after victory. Thor, after battle, would sit in silence, staring into his open hands. Freya would lay her golden cloak aside and close her eyes against the stars. The longhouse mirrors this divine pause. Children, now quiet, curl into woolen blankets. Elders speak in hushed voices. The mead sits untouched. The stories wait. There is no grief here, only gravity. The natural pull of the soul toward inwardness, a turning. We often think of silence as empty, but the Norse saw it as full of memory, of meaning, of presence. It was in the quiet that they remembered their ancestors, their gods, their place in the great wheel of time. One might hear in this hush the beating of a deeper drum, the pulse of the earth beneath frost and root. Sleep came not as a collapse, but as a descent. The Vikings did not fear darkness. They welcomed it as a veil, a transition, a sacred covering under which truths could emerge. The fire dimmed by human hand, but also by design, a sign that the mind, too, must lower its flame. A woman might sit by the fire, combing her daughter's hair in silence. A father might sharpen a blade not for battle, but for order. A child might trace a rune into the dirt with a fingertip, not speaking, not asking, all gestures of quiet. In this silence, wisdom rises. For the Norse, this was not just sleep preparation. It was communion, with self, with spirit, with the unseen. And so the longhouse did not merely grow quiet. It deepened, like a forest at dusk, like a sea before storm, like the breath before a name. Sleep, then, was not escape. It was arrival. To rest was to return, to the self, to the body, to the gods who watched not with judgment, but with shared stillness. The silence after the fall was not loss, it was grace, and within it the soul could finally say, I have lived, I have laughed, and now I rest. In the heart of the 9 realms, beneath the weight of loss and the hush of unanswered prayers, a rider stirred. His name was Hermod, son of Odin, brother of Baldur, and tonight he would ride not across Midgard nor over the Bifrost, but into the coldest hush the cosmos had ever known. Helheim. No god had ever gone willingly. No one had ever returned. But love is a strange fire, and Hermod's heart burned with it still. Baldur was gone, struck down by a trick, mourned by gods and beasts alike. Yet something deeper than sorrow moved in Asgard that day, a quiet resolve. So Odin gave Hermod Sleipnir, the 8-legged horse, black as void, swift as thought. He whispered no blessings. There were none to give. Only the wind knew what waited in the dark. And so Hermod rode, through shadow and frost, past the shimmering halls of the dead, into the roots of the world tree where silence grew thick and air thinned to memory. The stars above blinked and vanished. Sunlight fell behind him like a door closing. Even the Bifrost rainbow bridge of the gods ended at the edge of his will. Beyond that, nothing. And then hell. Hermod did not cry. He did not call out. He simply rode. For 9 nights and 9 days he journeyed. Time blurred. Sleep forgot him. His body grew cold, but his mind burned like flame. Even Sleipnir trembled at the gates of Niflheim, the cold realm where warmth has no name. Then came Gjallarbru, the bridge of echoing sound. It arched over a river of lost memories, and its guardian Maudgudur stood tall and pale. She held no blade, only a question. What brings a living soul to the land of the dead? Hermod's voice was not loud, but it did not waver. To see my brother, he said, to ask Hel for his return. Maudgudur stepped aside, and Sleipnir's hooves found passage across forgotten hopes and fading echoes. Onward they rode, deeper. There were no flames in Hel's realm, no light, only a softness like snow without warmth, and a silence so vast it swallowed sound before it was born. Here the dead did not wail. They waited, and in the center of that silence sat Hel, the goddess of the underworld, daughter of Loki, keeper of the still. She did not rise. She did not rage. She looked at Hermod with one eye of darkness, one of ice. You are far from the feasts of Asgard, she said. Hermod bowed and told her of the world above, how even the stones missed Baldur's laughter, how the gods could not sing, how everything living leaned toward sorrow. Hel listened. She did not weep, but something inside the stillness shifted, a pause that held promise. Go, she said, and ask the world. If every creature weeps for Baldur, he shall be released. Hermod's journey was not over. He would return to gods and giants, to elves and men, to beasts and rivers and stars, and ask each to shed a tear. But tonight, in this chapter, we sit not with the return, but with the ride, with the silence of love that moves mountains, with the courage to descend into stillness. We ride with Hermod, not to escape sleep, but to meet it with open eyes, to cross bridges that echo and pass through gates that breathe frost. The journey to Hel is not one of horror. It is one of depth. And as the rider turns his mount to leave the realm of endings, we too close our eyes, not to forget, but to feel. Beneath the roots of memory there is stillness. Beneath the veil of death there is devotion. And beyond the gate there is sleep. After the journey came the request, and after the request, silence. Hermod returned from Helheim with a message wrapped in stillness. If all things weep for Baldur, he shall be released. A simple condition, a divine bargain, but one that would test the entire cosmos. So Odin rose from his high seat. Freya sent doves with silver wings. Frigg whispered to the waters. And messengers of Asgard were dispatched to every realm. Gods, giants, dwarves, beasts, trees, stones, even stars. And one by one the tears came. The rivers wept, their currents slowing in mourning. The winds howled softly through pine forests. The mountains rumbled low, shedding frost like sorrow. The animals bowed their heads. The sun dimmed in golden grief, and humans in far corners of Midgard dreamed of a light they had lost but could not name. Even the sea wept, its tide carrying memory like salt. It seemed for a moment that the bargain would be fulfilled, that death might loosen its grip, that Baldur, the shining god, would rise again from the still. But then came the voice. It echoed not from heaven, nor earth, nor beast, but from a cave of shadows deep in the edge of things, a voice that refused. Let Hel keep what she has, it said. Why should all mourn for one? This voice was dry and cracked, old and bitter. It did not tremble, it did not bend. It did. It belonged to a giantess named Thok, but the gods knew in their bones that it was Loki in disguise. He had traveled further than any through disguise and deceit to cast a single stone in the path of hope, and it was enough. Hel, bound by her own word, kept Balder. The gate remained closed. The light did not return. And with that, something shifted. Not just in the fate of gods, but in the very rhythm of the world. The Norse believed in cycles, rise and fall, bloom and decay, birth and death. But this was a betrayal of the cycle, a denial of return. And so the gods grew quiet. Odin walked alone more often. Frigg did not sing. The halls of Asgard, once full of feasting and laughter, now echoed more than they echoed back. And sleep in those days came like fog, not heavy with peace, but light with ache. For in the betrayal of one soul, all souls felt the weight. But the Vikings knew, as we now must, that even betrayal carries wisdom. It shows the edges of loyalty. It sharpens the contours of love, and it prepares the heart for what must come next. For Ragnarok would come, but not yet. Tonight, we do not march to war. We do not burn bridges. We sit in the quiet that follows hope unmet. We let the hush of the longhouse cradle us. We breathe like the gods do, slow, sorrowful, and full of meaning. The lesson is not that hope dies, it's that hope endures, even when denied. That light flickers even when blocked. That every tear still counts, even when it falls unseen. And so, as the night deepens and firelight dances across tired faces, we remember Baldur, not in mourning, but in reverence. Because what is not returned is not lost, it is remembered, it is honored, it is loved. And so we sleep tonight, not because all is well, but because rest is resistance, because dreams still hold what waking cannot, because even in the silence after the final word, there is something more, and that something is the beginning of the end.